and welcome back to my channel. It is Nonfiction November, and so I wanted to take a look at my nonfiction TBR pile to see where I'm at. I haven't bought I've only bought one nonfiction book so far this year, and I've already read it. And the other nonfiction that I have read does definitely come from my physical TBR. So there isn't much left. So I kind of wanted to see, I kind of want to go through it and see how possible it would be or to basically finish all of these books. Now, I don't mean in the month of November. I'm not typically a readathon kind of reader, so I can't even guarantee I'll read a nonfiction in November. But the idea, the premise does sound interesting, and I am kind of in the mood to read nonfiction. So it could happen, it could not happen. But in any case, I definitely want to look through my pile my pile of nonfiction, or my TBR pile, and see where we're at. A lot of these, if you've seen my video, maybe the last time I discussed my nonfiction TBR, a lot of these should be familiar. They're the ones I just haven't gotten to yet. The one that's been on my TBR for the longest, it's been over a decade. I would say maybe 15 years. It's been on my TBR, and that is Alan Booth's memoir. Well, not memoir, but like a travelog type book. So Alan Booth's Looking for the Lost: Journeys Through a Vanishing Japan. Alan Booth is an amazing author. Unfortunately, he died quite young from cancer, and so he only wrote two books. His most famous book, which is The Roads to Sata, which is a 1,000-mile walk along the entire length of Japan, and that book was just absolutely fantastic. It's a great travelogue that sees him walking in a Japan that pretty much, a lot of it doesn't really exist anymore, because back then to see a foreigner in your village was maybe like an event of a lifetime. And so the interactions between the Japanese people and him can be very humorous while also being very frustrating, but also just make for a very memorable experience. And so Looking for the Lost is once again, he walked through Japan, but he walked primarily in the north of Japan, in the Tohoku area. And I had started this book once, and I was immediately entranced, like I knew I was going to be. But you know, sometimes your mood switches or something happens and you put a book down and you never pick it back up. And that was the situation with this. But now I'm more excited to read this because I myself finally visited the Tohoku area this past end of the year January season. So now that I am actually familiar with the area myself, I think I'll get even more out of this, and I think this will happen sooner than later, or at least I hope so, because I don't want to have this on my, like, this book is wonderful. I already know it's wonderful. I don't have to read it to know it's wonderful. And the first 100 pages I read of it, a few years back, it was wonderful. So there's no reason for me to be holding on to this. There's just not. So this is definitely a book that needs to be read. So that's the one that's been on my TBR for the longest. Now, another one, a book that I picked up when it was on sale at my local bookstore. I hadn't heard of it, but it just sounded very, very fascinating. And that is A Winter in Arabia by Freya Stark. And I'm going to read a little bit from the back. Freya Stark is most famous for her travels in Arabia at a time when very few men, let alone women, had fully explored its vast hinterlands. In 1934, she made her first journey to the Hadramaut in what is now Yemen, the first woman to do so alone. Even though that journey ended in disappointment, sickness, and a forced rescue, Freya Stark, undeterred, returned to Yemen 2 years later. So this is about that, and I think this will be absolutely beautiful. And I've definitely have heard very, very good things about this writer on the internet. So this is another travel memoir that just sounds absolutely fascinating. Now, I do have another category of books. I have a few nonfiction left in French, but only a few. And I think you can see why two of them I have not really read yet, because they're very, very large. I have Voyage en Orient by Lamartine. So Voyage in the Orient by the French philosopher Lamartine. So I do have tabs here, but that doesn't mean I read it. It's just I was originally contemplating reading through this on the basically on the dates of the actual of his journal, and it was a really good idea until I realized it was going to span probably about 2 years. So I didn't want to spend 2 years reading this, so I kind of gave up that idea, and maybe I'll just like keep these tabs and use that as like, today I'll read this date and whatnot. But I don't know, that was the idea, that was the concept I originally wanted to do. Realized that would probably fail. But in any case, yeah, this is just his voyages in between 1832 and 1833. So yeah, it's actually closer to almost 2 years, just because it's like beginning of 1832 and end of 1833. So this most likely won't be read in November, I can promise you that. The next similar book that I have is Voyage en Amérique, so Voyage to the Americas, by Chateaubriand, once again a French philosopher. And this is takes place in 1791, where Chateaubriand is only 23, and he makes a journey to America, and it's his observations. And this one I had actually started. I'm on a page 130, but I was kind of reading it. My mind was elsewhere when I was reading it, so I decided to put it down, and I think I will restart it when I read it. But yeah, it's just his observations. So obviously there's stuff just like on the nature, on fish, and like the foods, and then he has religion, and then of course he talks about the savages of America, so the Native American tribes in the US. And yeah, it just sounds really fascinating. I mean, any look at your own country via the perspective of both an outsider can be absolutely enlightening, and just can give you a perspective that you might not have considered. But also just the time period, getting to know more about the US at that time period is also really quite fascinating. So this is something that I would like to get back to at some point, even if it's not in the month of November. Now, the last French nonfiction that I have is a book that I actually had gotten quite far through. I'd gotten 120 pages through. And it was absolutely fascinating. But again, just one of those things where you put something down and you just don't pick it up again. But that is L'Affaire Cala by Voltaire, which is one of his more famous essays, along with other affairs. So affaire, it's not an affair, it's a court case, like the Cala case, basically. Yeah, the case is a better term. So he talks about the Cala case, which is basically this family that was murdered, and then one person within the family is treated as the main suspect just because their religion is different than the main religion in France. And so basically they're being prosecuted, and they're being falsely accused of something just because people kind of just want to get rid of them to begin with. They're like, oh, good riddance, they're of a different religion. So that talks about that, which from there, Voltaire uses that case to talk about what he calls traité sur la tolérance, so kind of like a treaty on the concept of tolerance. And that was I had gotten like, halfway, well, no, not even that, a third of the way through that. And he basically just takes like cases from around the world and use those as examples to show that where, intolerance versus a certain amount of people really led to this devastating event. And so why we should learn to be tolerant, basically. So this is also, he also writes about the servant case, Lali, and of the Chevalier de la Barre. So quite a lot in here. This was the first time for me to read all of these French authors. It was the first time for me to read Voltaire, first time for me to read Chateaubriand, Lamartine, all the big philosophers of France that I've never read before. So it was very, very exciting for me to pick those up. But I just never followed through towards the end. But that's where the nonfiction for my French language nonfiction stands. I have one we're gonna go back to English. I have one like trendy nonfiction. It's called But You're Still So Young, How 30-Somethings Are Redefining Adulthood by Kayleen and Schaefer. This is not typically the type of nonfiction that I read personally, but this was written by my sister-in-law, and so I wanted to read her book to see kind of what she writes about. So that's why I have this. this one I think I should read pretty soon. That way I can discuss it with her. So yeah, so I have that. And then what's left on my TBR pie is all my nonfiction about Japan, and specifically Japan during World War II. So the three I'm most excited about, but let's do the first two because it's from the same author. We have At Dawn We Slept, The Untold Story of Pearl Harbor by Gordon W. Prange. This is a book that at one time I had started reading. I had read about 200 pages out of the almost 900 pages. And it is, let me tell you, it is super, super fascinating. This is really, really good. It's like the pivotal reading you could read about Pearl Harbor, but it's not dry at all. It's written incredibly well. It's super detailed, but without making you feel like you're just reading like documents the entire time. Like Gordon Prange definitely knows how to properly mix primary sources and creating a proper narrative out of that. And so this was absolutely fantastic, but this was just a case of the book being so big, I couldn't really physically move with it very well. So I need to maybe read this during a vacation period where I can just properly sit down and just read it. So yeah, this is something, I've been dying to get back to this book because it was so, so, so good. And it's just absolutely mind-boggling. The number of times the US could have prevented Pearl Harbor is just like you had it. It was in your hands. It was in your grasp. Like you had the answer. You knew they were coming. So it's pretty fascinating to see, to read all about this. So yeah, this is something I would love to get back to because it was absolutely fascinating. Loved that. Now, Gordon W. Prange, I also have another book by him. So his focus was Pearl Harbor. So he wrote this book called God's Samurai, which is about the lead pilot at Pearl Harbor. So it's looking into the life of Mitsuo. Okay, it's very hard to transition. Mitsuo Fuchida. Yeah, so it's about his life, which is really really fascinating because he ends up surviving Pearl Harbor, and then after a scandalous love affair came his remarkable conversion to Christianity and years of touring the world as an evangelist. So that sounds absolutely amazing because not only did he have this pivotal role in Pearl Harbor, which is like the great event of that time period, basically, you know, having America be involved with Japan in World War II, which is just absolutely fascinating. But then the fact that this Japanese man converts to Christianity afterwards and becomes an evangelist at the same time is just something you don't really hear a lot about. So yeah, this is going to be an exciting read for sure. And Gordon Prange, after having read those 200 pages of the Pearl Harbor book, I just know that this is also going to be very, 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 very well researched and very well written. So then the other World War II book that I have is Taken Captive by Ooka Shohei, or Shohei Ooka. He's a very famous post-war author, and he became a prisoner of war. And this is, again, it's another book where I had read the majority of it. I had read pretty much half of the book and then just never finished it. There's a theme here. This actually might be a good time to just like use November to finish these books. That might actually be the best idea ever. Just like finish these books so that I can refresh my TBR pile and then move on and read something new and different. Plus, it is true that I want to read these World War II books quickly because I do plan on doing a video eventually about Japan during the war, both fiction and nonfiction. And that's a video I'm really, really looking forward to, but I really want to have these books included in that video. So it is time for me to read these. But, it's just one of those things, I think you have to be in a certain mood to want to read about war because it's very hard, it's very devastating, it's almost ridiculous in a sense, but it's really, really fascinating. And I know when I read the first half of this book, especially because I had just written another book about an American prisoner of war to the Japanese. And when you compare and contrast the experiences of both prisoner of wars, because Japan was notorious for being basically evil bastards, basically. So being able to compare and contrast those is absolutely fascinating. Plus, what's good about if I were to read this and we're able to properly introduce the book to you is that this book was purchased by a bigger publishing company, or I don't know what it was, but it's actually now a proper like paperback type thing. It's not like this really expensive clunky edition anymore. You can get your hands on it much easier than when I had to get my hands on this. So yeah, excited about this. Now the last 3 books left on my TBR are books that are they're the ones I'm most hesitant about. I've discussed these before in another nonfiction, but you know, for the new members who are watching me for the first time, it's again Japanese books during the war. But the thing is that it's basically all 3 books are about the concept of comfort women, and there are 2 topics that are pretty much lacking in Japan when it comes, or even in trend, or even from the West talking about these books. It's just a topic that's not really like been written about that much, so it was really hard to find anything, and that's basically the time period where Japan was a colonizer of Korea. So like that whole time period, there's not really that much fiction from the Japanese side. Yoshimi just this year came out with a fiction book called the Ends of August, I believe is the book, and that talks about the occupation. But really anything from the Japanese side, there isn't that much read. From the Korean side, I'm presuming there's a lot more, because usually when there's a victim, you complain, and so you write about it. But even that, not really that much available in English translation. So I had bought these to sort of to want to know more about that time period. But 2 of them, so these 2 I've tried reading before, and that's The Comfort Women by C. Sarah So, Sexual Violence and Post-Colonial Memory in Korea and Japan. And then this one, Assimilating Seoul, Japanese Rule and the Politics of Public Space in Colonial Korea, 1910 to 1945 by Todd Henry. But as you can tell by the subtitles, these are very academic nonfiction. They're books that I'm not quite used to reading, especially, I mean, even when I was in school, I struggled with like this level of academic writing. I wasn't very good at it. And now that I'm definitely not in school, it's even worse. So these are 2 books that I'll try again, but if I can't read them, I'll finally just get rid of them, because these are a little bit more difficult. Now, in terms of the Comfort Women, this one, I think if I'm going to read about the Comfort Women, I'm going to try this one first. This is Comfort Women by Yoshimi Yoshiaki, so sexual slavery in the Japanese military during World War II. And the reason this one sounds more intriguing is because, as I had mentioned before, reading about comfort women from the Japanese side, there are a lot of like, you know, Japanese nationalists in Japan who are also history revisionists, where they want to rewrite, you know, Japanese history to make themselves look better, you know. So, you know, they're saying Nanking massacre either didn't happen, or they're saying, oh, there weren't that many deaths, like you're over exaggerating it, like there weren't 300,000 murdered, like maybe like 3,000 or 1,000, you know. So there are a lot of revisionists. So it's hard to get something about this time period from a Japanese person without having to worry about whether or not they're sort of fibbing the details, or like sort of like making the details a little bit less dramatic. But Yoshimi Yoshiaki is actually the entire reason that Japan started looking into the whole comfort women. So it's because of him that Japan was like, oh crap, we made a mistake. So he's actually very, what's the word? He is very, this person was very aware of the situation and felt very bad about the situation. And he wanted Japan to make amends for the whole concept of comfort women. So I think if any book about comfort women should be read, it's this one. So there we go. So yeah, that's my nonfiction TBR pile as it stands. We'll see if I read something in November, because yeah, I don't know. Like, I think it's one of those things where like everything sounds so interesting that you almost don't know where to start, and so you just don't start. It's one of those silly like your mind being irrational for no reason, when really if you just picked any of these books up, they'd probably be very fascinating. And especially considering I've already read like 100 to almost 200 pages of a lot of these books. There's like, I actually already know they're fascinating, I just need to finish them. Like there's no reason, it's just ridiculous at this point. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.